Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And last week was absolutely full of black pills, so I'm just going to come out the gate saying let's have some white pills. And if obviously you want to keep up with all things clown decade, do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. So we had news about 10 days ago now that Nick Candy has put his money where his mouth is and is gifting Reform £1 million. It was said that he was all talk and no trousers, but he has actually kept good on his 7-figure pledge, which is very good to see because ultimately, while money alone does not get you very far in politics, you absolutely do need money to be anywhere close to fighting the national parties. I mean, just for example here, when you have 2019 versus 2024 spending, you can see that generally when it comes to the main parties, I should say, the more you spend, the more likely you are to win. And ultimately, where does all that money come from? It comes from donors, especially major donors like this. When it comes to membership fees, they also make up a fair chunk, but ultimately it is individuals and even companies donating to you that really do help out. And in Labour's case, obviously, trade unions set aside money for donations. You look at the Lib Dems though, and they buck this trend a bit, but well, given the devastation of the Tory party, it kind of makes sense. But next election, you have Reform spending way up there, equal with Tory or Labour. You're going to see quite the competition. So for Nick Candy, this is a moment of vindication. The property developer who serves as Reform UK's honorary treasurer has now given the party more than £1 million honouring his pledge made in December last year. And you may be wondering, why am I never seeing him in the news, and why does Reform... I mean, why have they changed him from the treasurer to honorary treasurer? Well, the answer to that is basically there was personal matters, we'll say, that stopped Nick Candy from fully investing his time into Reform UK. However, it looks like that he is past that time now, and I think we're going to see a little bit more of him, to the point that he may even be an MP, or if not an MP, maybe one of the people brought on for the next government. Over the summer, his critics, including senior figures in Reform UK, questioned whether he was willing to part with the money. One said he was all talk no trousers, and another said that there was pressure on him to deliver. Candy, a former Tory donor, believes much of the criticism emanated from old Tories he used to know. I have very dear friends there and it upsets me that they decided to do that, he said. I was always going to give this £1 million to Reform. I see it as an investment in the UK PLC, or the Public Limited Company. I truly believe that this is the only chance of saving our country, and many people are saying this, and it's for Reform UK to come to power. I can't ask others to come and donate money without leading by example. And it's very good that he has done that. And much like Danny Kruger coming over as the first sitting Tory MP, I should say, that's probably going to open the floodgates for many more. However, I think they're going to take their time with defections, as you've got 3 years of momentum to keep. And one of the best ways to do that is drip feed defections. We saw it with the 20 councillors who ended up moving over at the Tory conference. People thought there'd be an MP moving, but honestly, save that for future conferences. That might be a good idea. I have 2 young girls who are 11 and 8. I love this country, I love this city, and I want them to grow up and live here, but today people have a choice. So many people are leaving here. Friends are going to Monaco, Milan, the UAE, and even America, and that petrifies me. And hell, I know people that have moved to Canada and Australia because their prospects are simply better there. It worries me that by this time the election comes around, the amount of wealth that has left the country is going to be at a level that we've never even seen before, at least in our lifetimes. But what are those critics in his own party? I know exactly who they are, he said. Those people do great work for Reform, they're great public personas for Reform. All families, business have different opinions every single day, and Reform is no different. There's going to be different characters, and not every day they'll get on. It's just human nature, but it doesn't mean we should go on and tell the world what's going on. Perfectly fine response, yeah, and this is true within Reform. There are obviously internal disagreements. There's internal disagreements at every single branch meeting that I've been to. But it's this sort of thing of don't air your dirty laundry. I wouldn't be shocked if these public statements made by these people in Reform were given somewhat of a caning. Don't say anything to journalists. If it's off the record, they can still report it, they just can't attribute it to you. And people who've moved to Reform and aren't from the classic political sphere won't actually know that. So now for the gritty details. Candy pledged when he started his role to secure between 25 million and 40 million by the time of the general election. Not necessarily all of that is going to be the war chest for the election, but bear in mind with the graph before, 30 million was how much Labour spent at the last election, so if it does make it to 40 million or even more, you can expect about 30 million of that possibly to go toward election spending. But since that announcement last December, 10 months ago or so, Reform have secured just over £3 million, which, I would expect it to start off slow, and then the closer you get to election, that's when you get more and more of the donations. And as mentioned before, he's not really had the time to do his duty of doing that properly over the course of this year, so expect that 3 million to turn into tens of millions next year. The Tories have been given more than 9 million over the same period. Candy puts the relatively slow start down to the loyalty of the old guard Tory donors, and that's definitely true as well. But their children, he suggested, were reformistas. We're certainly getting that from the Jacob Rees-Mogg family, where his daughter has joined Reform UK, and Jacob Rees-Mogg even turned up there. He is very much the type of Tory old guard who simply cannot drop the brand because it's frankly part of their personality, and not only that, it's their entire social circle. What do you expect? Lord Bamford, historically one of Conservative Party's biggest donors, has said publicly he does not plan to donate to Reform, but his kids may come over, Candy said. I think the next generation of all these people, I think there is no denying now that if we had an election today or tomorrow or next year, Reform would form part of the next government. I think people wanted to see that in detail polling before coming across. Which is fair enough. It's much less of a risk when you're donating to them when they're in the 30% rather than the low 20s, which they were when Nick Candy first came over. It starts as a few drops and then it becomes a tidal wave. You're probably going to be seeing that with the Greens as well in the near future. God help us on that front. Anyway, Candy has stuck by his 40 million pledged by the next general election. I assume that means a minimum of £25 million. But to set himself a new target of 10 million by next May for those elections, I believe will raise more money than any other party, he said. The man's ambitious, I gotta give him that. And it sounds like he's really putting the pedal to the metal on this type of thing now. Candy met Farage after inviting him to his yacht during a holiday in Monterey a decade ago. That's quite classic for an elite meeting, we'll say. At the time, Candy was 100% fully a Tory, but Farage made an impression. He said he would come for a drink for an hour. He ended up staying about 7 hours, he recalled, and we got on very well. I got to know Nigel as a friend to begin with, and Candy defected to Reform in December last year, ending a long association with the Tories. He spoke about Farage with the fervour of an evangelist. I think he feels the heartbeat of the nation, and that I do agree with. He understands it. He understands why they are upset, why they are angry, what change they want to see. And that makes sense, because Farage is usually on the street, talking to people on the street. The last person to really feel the pulse of the nation was Blair in '97 after Princess Diana's death, and I'm good friends with Tony Blair. I spoke to Tony last week. I am good friends with Boris Johnson. I'm good friends with Nigel Farage. Those are the only three politicians since Thatcher that have a global brand name recognition, and only one of them has not been Prime Minister. I mean, that's certainly a very good way of putting it. It's kind of a shame that Boris Johnson has Tony Blair as well, have completely ruined their reputations. Please don't follow that, Nigel. I suppose third time's the charm on that front. But he was certainly right about Tony Blair. You do not win 3 elections in a row unless you are feeling the pulse of the nation. It's a shame that everyone had the wool pulled over their eyes, with Boris Johnson as well. Again, this really isn't boding well for Nigel Farage, but hell, let's go with it. I suppose to be absolutely fair here, Nigel Farage is sort of the anti-Boris Johnson and the anti-Blair. Just really as Blair and Johnson were kind of the anti-Thatcher. But, everyone likes to pretend that they put Thatcherism on steroids, which isn't remotely true. So Candy remains friends with Boris Johnson and saw him recently at the Cotswolds wedding of Lord Goldsmith, a former Tory minister. It was a really lovely affair. Boris was there, Carrie was there, Dorries, a former Tory minister who defected to Reform, was there. I love Boris. I think Boris was hard done by, and I think the party treated him terribly. I actually do agree with that, but he was also a terrible Prime Minister, but I don't expect one of his friends to say that in an interview. How does Candy feel about the fact Farage put Johnson at the centre of his attacks on the Tories, that he now refers to hundreds of thousands of migrants who came here under Johnson's post-Brexit migration regime and will soon have the right to settle permanently in the UK as Boris wave? That's a very succinct way to put it. But, to be fair, I think it would be fairer to say over 1 million rather than hundreds of thousands, but there we go. Well, Candy, who recently separated from his wife, Holly Valance, so they do mention what the personal thing was, fair enough, said he wouldn't use the term himself. fair enough, he is friends with him. Every PM will make a number of decisions that will be wrong, it's just a matter of fact. Yeah, but this was a disaster, Candy, come on. He reasoned you want to get the big ones right, and this was a big one that he got very, very wrong. He is incandescent at Sir Keir Starmer's claim that Farage has pursued racist policies, and up until that moment I had respect for Keir Starmer as a human being. The minute he starts talking about Farage being racist, Lammy comparing him to Hitler, all the stuff they did that week, that brings them not just down to the gutter, but that puts them down the drain. They are disgusting, they are gone, they don't deserve to be in office. Stronger words, because he's not friends with these people. Well done, Mr. Candy. It is always quite funny interviewing people who are actually friends with disaster politicians like Boris Johnson, because you are never going to get them saying what they would probably really be saying if they weren't friends with them, but then it's pretty obvious what they would be saying with them when you start asking them questions about people they're not friends with. It's all very funny. And hell, if he is bringing £40 million to reform for their war chest when it comes to these elections, I've not got a problem with him then, do I? So is Johnson interested in a comeback? Not within the Tory party, he says. I think it's over. The way I look at it, they've had 5 PMs in 14 years. If you had a company that had 5 CEOs in 14 years and you still can't sort the company out, you wouldn't say it's a CEO problem. You would say you should probably put the company into admin. I think the Tory party should be put into admin. Oh, God. Pretty devastating stuff, that. What does he think of Badenoch? I don't ever want to be rude about anyone, he says, apart from maybe Keir Starmer, but the perception of her in the Middle East by people she went to meet was that all that she seemed to care about was the photo and the media opportunity, and zero interest in the substance of any meeting, and that's frightening. Which I wouldn't be particularly shocked if that's how Cami Badenoch sees politics. It's kind of how she got through politics. I mean, in hindsight, me saying that she'll be the next Thatcher was probably being a bit overexcited. In reality, she said base things on camera, and there really wasn't that much more substance to it, to be honest with you. But man, we were so desperate for just anything that was slightly based. I think I can excuse myself on that front. He predicts there will be a general election in 2027. That's when I predicted there'd be one. I don't think there will be one now, by the way. I think we're seeing a whole term of this, unless there's massive economic crisis that just can't be recoverable for Labour. So maybe it will be 2027. In 2027, they will have to do an austerity budget, which this country would never have seen anything like. I mean, I agree, we do need one, though. They won't be able to get that austerity budget through their party. That's absolutely true, because they're a party that don't realise that if you spend more, you have to tax more. Even MMTers say that, by the way, to stop inflation. And that will be recalling Parliament and general election time. It was Candy who brokered the meeting between Farage and Musk this year that turned sour. Candy maintained that Musk was amazing, but added, he's been very badly briefed by a few people that think they understand UK politics. Yeah, I thought that was the case. I think Musk is a bit too pro-Tommy Robinson, and being pro-Tommy Robinson in UK politics does not a popular politician make. That's just true. So Elon thinks that if Nigel invites Robinson, the far-right activist, he's got more of a chance of winning. I mean, how's that gone for Advance UK so far? You know, they've floundered at just over 30,000 members, and I don't even think they're at 30,000 members, by the way. I think we're literally being lied to about that by Ben Habib. You've seen the polling, we've seen the polling, that would be a disaster, we don't need to do it. Absolutely true, and yes, Musk is being briefed by the complete wrong people, and honestly, I thought the whole thing was about Tommy Robinson, and it's good to see finally that someone's openly said it, because Farage never really mentions what happened, he just says it turned sour. I won't go into details, which is honourable of him, but thank you very much, Nick Candy, for letting me know that my assumption was once again correct. Now, I think it's also worth noting at this point that in another article by The Times, part of the reason Reform's donations haven't quite been as large as we would have hoped is basically because a lot of foreign people want to donate to Reform, and they have had to hand back nearly £200,000 because obviously they're not permitted to make political donations to the UK. There were 23 donations to British politicians and parties over the past year, I think this is, or at least since the last general election, and 18 were attempted to be given to Reform UK, and Reform rejected them all because they are trying to be whiter than white here. And Reform take pride in its stringent vetting of donations and always ensure that guidelines on donations are strictly followed, as has been the case with donations so far. Anyway, we move over to the big news of the weekend, which is that Reform's new kingmaker, the theologian friend of JD Vance. This is Cambridge University's James Orr, who is tasked with giving Farage's party a lift by acquiring new talent. Now, this is absolutely fantastic news because James Orr's kind of had feet in both the Reform and the Tory party. He especially seems to be a Jamrick ally, and it now seems that he's taken the plunge and decided to put both feet in the Reform camp. And this is very, very good, because if there is anyone who can find elite talent, it is someone in Cambridge University who is in probably one of the only departments that has been vehemently against woke. But, well, we'll go through it. So Farage has appointed a Cambridge University theologian with strong links to the White House as senior advisor. Probably the best person you could get for the job, to be honest. James Orr, an associate professor of religion at the Faculty of Divinity, will be tasked with boosting Reform UK's acquisition of talent, the Telegraph can reveal. Close ally of JD Vance, Trump's vice president, whom he hosted at his Cambridge home this August, Mr. Orr will be responsible for building networks of elite defectors from academia, business, law, to create what he says will be a party of second chances. Interesting way to put that. From what I'm reading from this, it is effectively saying there are people in academia, business and law who, let's say, went down a bit of a woke route because they thought it was going to be the future, and they're basically happy to ditch all that to effectively make Reform kill woke. At least that's my reading of it. On top of that, one thing that I absolutely love is that people for months and months and months have basically said, oh, Reform obviously need a team and talent, as if that's not like saying to Manchester United, you need to score some goals. As if Reform haven't been working on this, because one thing you've really got to know about announcements like this is that typically when they announce it, there's actually been work being done in the background without the public knowledge for weeks and even possibly months. And again, when you get a big announcement like this, as you see from Reform, over the coming months you tend to get other announcements of people joining the team. And obviously they've had a team of lawyers for months. It's probably part of the reason they backtracked on the whole inquiry thing, but hell, nobody actually takes a fine-tooth comb over Lowe's, do they? So I hardly see that as a criticism these days. He'll also be entrusted with perhaps Reform's greatest challenge, helping to select would-be MPs, as well as translating surging public support into actual votes. Which is actually the problem we have. June Slater did a video the other day basically saying that there were a load of people that she was talking to who hired a coach to take them from somewhere in the north in Lancashire all the way to London for the, I think it was for the Tommy Robinson March, I can't imagine what else it would be. When she asked them, who do you all vote for, they all said they don't vote. And it's amazing to some people, apparently, how Keir Starmer is Prime Minister. And that's why, because there's a lot of people with good instincts who would vote for a party who actually offered them, well, real solutions to what the Tories said that they would offer them. Basically, it's people who felt burned by the Tories, and because of that they feel burned by politics in general and so aren't voting. And this is the message that Reform have to get across. Yes, we are different. And it's going to take quite some convincing to bring some people around on that front. Mr. Farage told the Telegraph that James Orr is dedicated to the mission we have at hand, both in his heart and in his head. I am pleased to welcome him on the team, and this is, again, a bit like Danny Kruger coming over, a bit like 9/11 for the Tories. This was yet another small c conservative who quite clearly understands what he's talking about and also brings with him quite a bit of influence, who's decided to put both feet in with Reform rather than stick it out with the Tories and see if they can recover once they oust Kemi Badenoch and put, let's face it, either Jenrick or Cleverly in, though my money is still on Cleverly winning that. Speaking in an interview from Reform's London HQ, Mr. Orr said that the left and right is over and must be replaced with the politics of national self-interest. I'm basically on board with that. I mean, the economic argument's basically over anyway. We tried international free trade and it worked quite well in the 80s, but it quite quickly got taken over by multinational interests who ended up lobbying their way into effectively having their own cartels at the very top of the chain and basically outsourced all the useful jobs to China, while finance and law were very much focused on in Britain. And it's all well and good to have those sectors, but ultimately you do need your manufacturing and your actual material goods as part of your economy. I should make it clear, I am still very much an instinctive libertarian when it comes to economics. We just need, as a society, better pathogens against the multinational self-interest that we've seen over the past 20 years or so. Mr. Orr's role is deliberately imprecise in order to give him flexibility to cultivate the networks Reform hopes to attract into the party and eventually into government. Hell, I've had jobs like that before, and usually they're very good. The Telegraph asked him if he was concerned Reform would struggle with the same vetting issues that plagued Cummings, who, after calling for weirdos and misfits in Johnson's cabinet, saw the first of his new class of advisers pushed out of Westminster over comments he made several years before his hiring, which I think were about eugenics. And hell, even I've got a video defending him on that. Mr. Orr is unambiguous about the need to defend talented individuals. Reform's attitude to cancel culture is informed by the experience of its party leader, who has faced relentless personal criticism throughout his long political career and was even debanked, for goodness sake. I think we should be a party of second chances. We know what it's like. We're going to support them, he said. Oh, so maybe my reading before was a little off. Maybe when he's talking about academics and things like that, he's meaning ones that have been cancelled by woke rather than ones who went along with woke. Honestly, that's actually a hell of a lot better. And to be honest with you, you're already seeing people like that, such as Matt Goodwin. Possibly even Eric Kaufman, who knows. I would obviously plead that they blacklist academic agent, though. That absolutely has to be a limit. It's a commitment to political loyalty shared by his friend, Mr. Vance, who refused to condemn a leaked group chat where young Republicans swapped offensive jokes this week. I mean, in America, I think cancel culture is pretty much over, especially given that every time there's an attempt to cancel Trump, he basically just posts another offensive AI video that, let's face it, are usually quite funny. I admire what the Vice President has done, and I think he's shown spine and not gone along with the standard playbook. Young people make mistakes, he said. I mean, that's very true. And this is also why I know some people who are quite paranoid about their digital footprint. And hell, I've proved mine somewhat. But ultimately, it's ended up moving me in a more professional direction. And I think the near future, you're going to see cancelling be, a lot harder to actually be successful with. I mean, hell, if Graham Linehan can come back from his cancellations, I actually have a pretty white-pilled vision of the future. This unambiguous commitment may help Reform coax publicity-shy fellow travellers. Yeah, exactly. Mr. Orr describes the catch-22, where elites would-be defectors express their desire to help but hold back because you haven't got enough people on board. Well, you don't have enough people on board because you're not joining. Yeah, that's the catch-22. He said he knows he needs the potential allies to defect a reform soon to prove to others they have enough good people in the party, and Orr himself is going to be a good example of that. There's a cordon sanitaire around the party, which is around every populist party surging in Europe at the moment, whether it's Chega, RN, what's RN? Is that the French one? I can't remember. Vox and the AFD. RN's National Rally, but the French version has Rallye Nationale, or whatever it is, and that's absolutely true. But you join these parties, you are at risk of being cancelled. The good thing about Reform is that, frankly, they can point to people who hate them, who are openly racist, and whose entire digital footprint is basically brown people bad, and say, well, we're not attracting them, so why do you think we're racist? But some people need more convincing than that, obviously. Although Britain is no longer Europe's laggard in the populist stakes, Reform's electoral surge is yet to be replicated amongst those at the top of their fields. This is a populist surge as we're seeing, and you'll see elites move over as time goes on, as they become more normalised. They're already pretty much normalised, but in these bubbles and in these circles, they're just not. And that's just the reality of it. In his role at Cambridge, Mr. Orr claims to have met hundreds of highly able students he thinks will make suitable allies. It will be his job to discover how these individuals can be recruited into the party at scale, a task that will be made easier by elite defections, such as that as Charles Trevelyan, who shockingly switches allegiances from the Liberals to Labour in 1918 to join a start-up working-class populist party. That's basically what we're doing again, but this time we're going to make it based. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Orr compares the blue-blooded Trevelyan to recent Tory defector MP Danny Kruger. Orr sees the breakthrough of reform as rooted in history, comparing it to the moment where the old Liberal Party was forever destroyed by Ramsay MacDonald's Labour in 1920s. And there's plenty of people making similar comparisons to that too. Because, yeah, this is probably going to end up with the Tory party being a very regional party where they win anywhere between 10 and 70 seats depending on the election, much like the Lib Dems are. Hell, I can see in 10 years' time the Lib Dems and the Tories converging into a new party. Because ultimately, in 10 years' time, people will have forgotten that for a century everyone was supposed to hate the Tory party, and now it's time to hate Reform instead. Who will probably also rebrand their name once they've done the reforming. It's all funny stuff, politics, isn't it? In the fragile minority Labour government of 1924, quickly thrown out of power by the Tories, really a good model for reform, He concedes that it took Labour several years after the collapse to fully prepare itself for government, but underlines that the early defects who paid a high reputational cost eventually looked prescient, unlike their complicit Liberal counterparts. And, well, at least for polling for now, it doesn't look like Reform are going to have a minority government, but, well, things can change very rapidly in the lead up to a general election. With his penchant for tweed and habit of quoting from the writings of Edmund Burke, Mr. Orr looks entirely the part a Tory Oxbridge Don. Has he ever been a Conservative? Well, at 18 he gave his first vote to the party in the disastrous 97 election. It was more of an anti-Blair vote, though, last Mr. Orr. He did join the party, but sporadic support in the following years ended after he cut up his membership card, something he did together with his daughter after Theresa May's Brexit betrayal. He definitely voted Brexit Party then. He sees the referendum result as having destroyed the old politics, and it is evident how central the Leave cause was to his thinking. Mr. Orr described himself as being the only openly out Brexiteer at Oxford University during this period, despite knowing a handful of academics who had secretly voted Leave. Mr. Orr, who is in his 40s, had little time for those he deems as boomer conservatives, people who enjoy obsessing over faraway conflicts they have very little influence over. Damn, fair enough. In the old days they were called neocons, but calling them boomer conservatives I guess is fair enough. It makes a bit more sense in America where they do actually have influence, but yeah, in Britain we very much do not have the same amount of influence. But hopefully one day we will again soon. Orr also identifies friction between those who believe they held a monopoly on the right-leaning politics and younger, more radical upstarts, the Zoomer right, who want rapid action to arrest national decline. And I do hope Mr. Orr is able to differentiate between the useful and very much not useful ones in the Zoomer waffen. People seem to have a misunderstanding of what my position on the Zoomer right is. I basically hate all of the ones that are on the media at the moment. I can't name you a single Zoomer who ends up on GB News say that I actually think is particularly useful. The ones who spend most of their time on Twitter aren't particularly useful either, apart from a few ones that I can name, such as Max Temper's stakeholder consultant. I believe both of those people are younger than me. Adam Wren, I suppose, as well, has his uses, though he's a bit too Tory. And I'd basically struggle to name people beyond that, to be honest. If I can only name 3, we have a bit of a problem. However, there may be many, many, many who are not as big on Twitter or on the mainstream who are very useful. And with what James Orr has said so far, and given the fact that he's fully on board with Farage's plan, I am effectively going to trust his judgment on this. He looks up to Mr. Farage, describing him as having more political experience than the entire cabinet, but he rejects suggestions that reform is a hollow vessel for Mr. Farage's prime ministerial ambitions. The campaigning success story of the party comes from a trickle-down structure, from questioning what Farage would do, akin to Tories asking what Thatcher would do when she was Prime Minister. If there is criticism in the grassroots, Mr. Orr claims it is over the perception that Mr. Farage is not radical enough, which, yeah, makes sense, because ultimately you're trying to get normies on board, and the British normie does not like radicalism. When we have revolutions in Britain post-Civil War, it tends to be where the average person's life does not change an awful lot, and they just carry on like things haven't changed. That's typically how the average Brit acts, and what they will effectively vote for. Mr. Orr addressed the Reform Conference and cut a rather different figure from those speaking on the main stage. At a packed-out fringe event, he discussed whether the country was ready for the party to form government while referring to Aristotelian ethics. Again, rather succinct and a niche topic. I mean, ultimately, he is trying to talk to an audience of people who want to be part of the Reform elite, so he is going to be talking about that, and it's very much a fringe event that I probably would have found myself at had I been at Reform Conference. Well, I do hope to see him next year. Having never attended a party conference before, what did he make of it? The ratio of business suits to shell suits was marvellous. There were very few lobbyists, very few so-called experts. You would see an old farmer in a Barber jacket talking to a tattooed 17-year-old Millwall supporter about how they're going to save the country. Unironically, I've seen that with my own eyes before, by the way. What other party has managed to achieve that in living memory? Reform wants to bring the country together. We need posh as well as bosh. I do agree with him there. The bosh being in reference to the catchphrase of Tom Skinner, former Apprentice contestant, who found fame online for posting photographs of ludicrously large portions of food eaten at the crack of dawn, alongside endearing stories about his family and working life. He's basically Essex man. That's what he is. He is a result of Thatcherism, which is always what makes it so funny when people go on about, oh, Thatcherism ruined the family. How can you possibly say that? Essex man Tom Skinner is the most family-orientated man I think I've ever seen. Just ignore the fact he cheated on his wife. Like him, Skinner has gone on a political journey, meeting with Mr. Vance and speaking at the Now in England conference, partly organised by Mr. Orr, alongside Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Home Secretary, and Mr. Kruger. Which again is all very funny because that conference was set up by a pretty explicit Tory think tank, and now obviously Kruger and Orr have moved. I guess because they just can't see the Tories actually helping out with them. And, well, Jenrick, I think, is blacklisted from joining Reform, so it's interesting to see where this all goes. That was still one of the funniest panels I think I've ever seen in my life, by the way. I've never seen a bigger disconnect between everything the panel was saying and the audience. The audience was basically full of ethno-nationalists, and the panel was full of people who didn't want to go down the ethno-nationalist route. And obviously because the ethno-nationalists haven't really made mainstream arguments, well, gone to conferences and felt like they can say to be English you have to have so much English ancestry or whatever, it did end up with just Robert Toombs laughing at people like that. And honestly, I have a lot of sympathy for Robert Toombs' position. But they really do have to come up with better arguments than the Michaela School, because the Michaela School, honestly, the culture they have within there just seems a bit mad. Everyone has to eat the same meal at lunchtime. Therefore, it all has to be vegetarian. You can't show anything that even relates to your faith. Praying was banned there. It's not so much a pro-British school as it is, we're trying to make everyone a bit of a grey blob. But then again, they were reciting Kipling and singing God Save the King, so maybe that's a little harsh. Honestly, it's one of those things that I think I'm going to have to actually go to really understand it, but I think there's plenty of criticisms you can have about it. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about that, and I've talked about it plenty in the past. The condescension toward the party supporters makes his blood boil. He says it's the English working classes who've saved this country so many times over the years. Saved it in 1940 when they swung behind Churchill against appeasement, saved it in 79 when they supported Thatcher, and saved it in 2016 when they came out in their millions to vote for Brexit. Does Britain need a revolution? Mr. Orr is careful. The party seeks to achieve is a restoration, attempting to restore the roots of a nation that were cut away by Tony Blair's constitutional changes, he says. Absolutely fantastic thing to hear. Mr. Farage will do things that the establishment views as radical and extreme, but it will all be in service of a return to the fruits of a functioning society, he adds. There's a brief pause. Perhaps a better way of putting it is just reform. That's a great way to end it. So with that, I think we can look to the near future in a pretty positive light. Reform have a plan to recruit their talent. Reform have a plan to get the donations. Reform are going to be working tirelessly to effectively normalise themselves. They're basically normalised with the working class at this point. That's also going to be part of the culture that only grows. It's now just a case of normalising it with the elites, which, given all the fringe events and getting Jacob Rees-Mogg over, and even Jacob Rees-Mogg saying lend your vote to Reform, there seems to be only one direction this is going. This is all very good news for the near future, as we have many elections coming up next May. That's going to be a big test. Let's hope we take Wales. I know I'll be doing everything I can to help. And you should too, actually. Join Reform right now. Do it right now. It's 25 quid. Do it. Anyway, with that, I think that's everything I had for you for today. So tomorrow we have Tosh News over on the Worcester Club channel. I think it's Wednesday we're doing the gaming stream again. I'll need to update on that when I know for sure. And that's it for streams this week. Wolves of Westminster obviously out Friday. Videos out as and when I can make them. With that, yeah, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, become a channel member, leave super chat, super thanks, all that good stuff. With that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.